Hey, welcome to Genre Exposure, a film podcast. We're back with another of our special bonus quick cut episodes. So I'm one of your hosts, Dustin, and as usual, I'm here with Michael.
Hello.
And Jason.
Hey, everybody.
How you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
Trying to make these intros different for these.
Sure, yeah.
Just
distinguish them from the others.
Change it up a little.
Yeah.
I actually just thought you forgot the intro, and you're like, oh shit, there's people sitting here with me right now. Okay.
No, so we are back for a special discussion topic this time.
Yes.
So the last few episodes we have done have kind of been this block of A24-ish, quote-unquote, elevated horror films. And it's rare that we get a lot of feedback from anyone, but we did get a comment on one of these episodes. Mm-hmm. It was when Saint Maud dropped, and someone was like, hey, I really didn't feel like you guys broke down what elevated horror is when you're talking about it.
Right.
And we had a good conversation. I kind of explained like what was going on. And I thought it was worth enough for us to kind of come back to this topic and sort of put the nail in the coffin and close it out. Because we didn't really go too deep on it. And I think I maybe owe listeners an apology for that. Because I'll give a little behind the scenes on this.
Yes, you personally, not
Yes.
Michael and I. We don't.
We
owe you nothing.
I didn't do shit.
So Michael picked Saint Maud, and that was just kind of in a vacuum. You really wanted to see it. You wanted to watch it.
Sure, yeah.
Then, Jason, you picked The Reflecting Skin. You had been talking about this for a while now that you wanted to revisit it.
Oh, yeah, it's in my back pocket for a while.
And it wasn't until we were working on that episode that I kind of saw the dots picked under the Silver Lake and then connected them, and have since kind of like the hype man in me. You know, I grew up with like the Stan Lee school of like make everything hyped and big,
Right.
a spectacle. I connected these dots like it was like, oh, a block of 3 episodes that are focused on this topic. When really, maybe it probably wasn't. It kind of, by happenstance, turned that way.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't like anything planned.
So maybe that's my bad for overhyping it a little bit.
Could be. You're probably right. You're
and
terrible.
Fuck me, guys. But we've touched on elevated horror before in this idea, and this, maybe it's a genre, maybe it's not. But I just thought it would be good since someone did bring it up and ask about it. I think we do want to be known as a podcast that, like, you can write to us and ask questions, and we will try to answer them. Or if you wanted more information, we will make that time to go back and circle around to it.
Yep, we live to serve.
So today we're mostly just going to talk about...
I'm not okay with this.
It's too late, you're already in.
Oh, shit.
So we're just going to talk about this topic, this idea of quote-unquote elevated horror, what it is, where did it come from, and what is it? And so I want to start us off right away with this idea. Truthfully, it may not be a subgenre the way people talk about it like it is.
Well, there's not a whole lot of elevator horror movies, so it's kind of a subgenre. Devil, sure, The Lift, that British film.
You know my biggest problem with elevator horror films?
What's that?
They're really up and down.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Sometimes they give you the
elevation
shaft.
horror.
Oh, no. He's
Not
a
that
bad mother.
That's a different genre. Elevated, what?
Yes.
What's elevated?
Elevated.
If
So,
somebody didn't just immediately just click skip. Like, fuck, I don't want to listen to these.
all right, now that we've filtered all the other people out,
Sorry, you elevator horror fans.
I promise we'll do that one day. Maybe years out, but we'll see. So, first thought I wanted to kind of lead us on. Horror as a genre has kind of always been looked down on in the mainstream perspective as far as like being acceptable. If you look at award shows, the number of films that have actually won like big, like Oscars, Academy Awards, any of that kind of stuff for the actual horror genre, it's very slight. And when you look at the ones that have, like the first one I think that'll come to mind to a lot of people is Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
And do you guys know what they considered that to be when it got the award?
It was like a suspense thriller.
Yes.
I think it's still listed as that. Like,
Does
if
it scare you? If it scares you, it's a horror film.
I remember when we were working at Movie Warehouse, it was always in like
Yeah, it's like the thriller section.
thriller.
Or whatever,
For some reason, we had a
suspense.
thriller section. I don't know why. But
Yeah.
And I think it's almost unequivocally a horror film. I don't know how you could call it anything else than that.
Yeah, how is it anything
Yeah.
but... Yeah, it's all about a dude who eats people and a guy who skins people. And yeah, it's scary.
But then what happens, though, is this is probably going to lead into our discussion on elevated horror. There's such a strange break in what people consider horror. Like, if it doesn't make you shit your pants scared, people are like, well, that didn't scare me, so that wasn't a horror film.
Some people have a very, like, off-on definition of what horror is, and it's did it scare me, yes or no, period.
Right, and being scared of something is so subjective. It's the same as comedy.
Right.
You know, like, for some people, what scares you doesn't scare somebody else.
It's about intent.
Right. And mood. I think mood and tone really reflect in that. But
and that's often what I'll kind of try to look for, because it's like, did this scare me? I don't know, but I loved the atmosphere and the mood it was kind of building.
Right.
Sure, and as hardcore horror fans, when are we truly scared anymore? You know, like we've seen so much stuff that it's not the extreme that scares me anymore. It's really the subtle that gets me. Something that insidiously creeps inside, like plants a seed inside you that you're thinking about for like a week and a half later, and then you're like, fuck, why am I still thinking about that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's to me, like, that's the good shit.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the stuff that really gets under your skin. Give me jump scares all day, that's fine. They're fun.
But it doesn't stick with you.
No, you know,
They're empty calories.
And it is okay for a film to just be fun like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that a lot of people prefer that type of horror film. They don't want to see a serious, elevated, extreme air quotes here, horror film, because they just want to have they want a roller coaster. You know, they don't really want to be scared.
So it's almost this joke that, like, critically, from like a professional perspective, we can't say that horror films are good because they are like this lower thing. So, we'll call Silence of the Lambs a thriller.
Right.
That way we can give it accolades. However, I do think that in recent years we have seen more widespread acceptance of the horror genre. You can look at stuff like Paranormal Activity, which maybe isn't like a critically praised film, but it blew back up horror in the cinema, and people coming out and these big budget, like high ticket movies. Well, that wasn't particularly big budget, but
Right.
You know, it was the true successful horror formula of, we made this thing for cheap, but it played very well to people.
And marketing for that
marketing,
one too.
yeah.
Marketing was key for that one. That one scared the shit out of me. First one I saw, when I first saw Paranormal Activity, it was so effective. It scared the bejesus out of me.
I like the first one. It's good. And the third one, I think, is the best, personally.
I haven't watched that one, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, go watch it. Third one's great.
But no, the first one, that's one of the ones that actually scared the shit out of me. But
I hear people talk about the marked ones, but I never watched it.
I watched it. It's okay. It was a nice change of pace because it didn't deal with a bunch of rich white people. So it was kind of,
it's a good start.
different, you know.
So skipping ahead a little bit, but we'll go to 2017, and Get Out ends up winning awards, major awards.
Rightly so.
yeah, it's fucking awesome.
It deserved it, certainly. But again, when you look at it, what were the critics at the time calling it for winning all those awards?
That's a thriller.
They said it was a thriller or a social comedy.
Social comedy.
And Jordan Peele even kind of was like he called them out about that and was like, what? No, it's a horror film.
Don't you know that horror films make social commentary all the time?
Yeah. I mean, that's what they're for.
Yeah.
And so again, it's still this pool of like, we can't let it just be a horror film and also be this great work of art. There's like a divide there that people just don't want to cross for some reason.
Because you say horror, and they're afraid people are going to think like Friday the 13th or something.
Yeah, immediately somebody jumps to masked killer.
Yeah.
Slasher or
say
blood, guts, and gore.
It's just trashy. The characters don't matter. There's tits. There's blood.
Which are all great. Don't get us wrong. We
Love
love
them.
that shit too.
But like you can... one of the goriest films that I've ever seen is probably like some of the war films, you know, like Saving Private Ryan. What's different? Because that's realistic gore?
Talk about a scary movie. At least scary scenes in that movie.
Well,
God, yeah.
that's generally
I mean-
a problem in America. We kind of move the goalpost on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's along this line of this divide between like a good artful film and trash that this elevated horror topic has kind of sprung up.
Right.
And A24 is central to all of this in the films they make and the kind of style they do, which is why we focused on A24 films, and I made this reference. And kind of the first film where you really saw it take off and people started using the term elevated horror and talking about it was with 2015's The Witch.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, mine
I
too.
think we all love it here. Yeah.
That was on my 5 from episode 0. People remember.
Yep.
And I can remember I wasn't particularly interested in seeing it when it first came out.
Why not? What was wrong with you?
It seemed kind of cool, and I was like, I don't know. And what really made me want to watch it is one of Tiffany's friends went to see it on a whim, and they complained about it because they were like, they talk funny, I can't understand them. I couldn't like follow the movie because I couldn't understand them. And I was like, well, it can't be that, you know, they would have subtitled it if it was that different and hard to follow.
Right.
And I think then they put out... A24 is great at marketing. That's another thing we should talk about for a second.
They are. Yeah.
They made the joke trailer where it was all the scenes of Black Phillip. and they made it seem like the whole movie was just about the goat.
Evil demonic goat, yeah.
And Tiffany's
I
like,
have no problems with that movie. I'd watch the shit
I
out of
watched
it.
that too.
I'd watch Black Phillip just walking around,
yeah.
Sure.
talking shit to everybody.
But, they've done other stuff. Like, they made the toy bear in a cage for Midsummer.
Right.
They've made a tabletop role-playing game box set for Green Knight. Mm-hmm. They're very good at marketing. I love all the stuff they do to promote their things. But it was in the wake of those, I was like, you know what? I'll give this a try. And it blew me away. I loved it. But it is doing something kind of different you hadn't seen, at least in recent time.
Refreshingly so.
I think what we're going to get into is that there's always been films like this, but it's like I guess they would say there's a new generation of people that are seeing this type of horror film for the first time in 2015 when it dropped.
I think you're right. I think that's probably the big issue here, because a lot of the horror we've been getting has been, like the Paranormal Activity films, like the Saw movies, things like that. It seems to have gotten really watered down, and
because everything is like cyclical trends.
it's
right?
fast food horror in a lot of ways.
Well, and I'd mentioned before that one of my issues with the Saw franchise that kind of drew me away from it was the high school love for it. Of like, and as much as I absolutely love Dead Meat, the YouTuber,
right?
James A. Janice.
Yeah, there's like that trend of like, well, I watched the kill count, so what do I need to watch the movie? Mm-hmm. It becomes all about the kill count, all about the gore, and like there's no subtext.
Yeah, even he's like, watch the movie.
Yeah. But so I that's kind of what pushed, I think, a lot of people away, is because it's like, well, when you talk about what's the kill count of the witch, like 2?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
death doesn't equal scary.
Right.
In some of the scariest movies, almost no one dies,
So I think that's one of the issues too, is like, what are you primed for?
Right.
What are you
after?
Yeah, what have you been watching? What are you kind of thinking that the next horror film will be? And then for a lot of people, you have to think, what does scare you? Mm-hmm. What is scary to you? And to me, things like Hostel aren't scary. Saw is not scary. I'm not ever worried about a crazy killer like tying me up and torturing me in a basement.
See, I know a lot of people.
You are currently in my basement.
Yeah. Well, I've got a lot of friends like they cannot do home invasion films. Like that just destroys them.
Triggers them, sure.
Right, because that does happen. It can happen. It will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of things do scare me. But what scares me the most are the unanswerable questions. Mm-hmm. I think that's what always gets me the most. The unknown, the unanswerable.
Sure.
And
nobody wants people invading their home and trying to kill them or whatever, but a mortal being I can deal with.
Right.
I can win against that. I have a chance to kill this person or whatever, or
Hopefully.
stop them. Hopefully. Yeah. True. I'm a total wuss, but anyway. But like you say, the big questions, like mortality.
Sure.
You're not going to beat that.
And that's what happened with The Witch. Mm-hmm. The Witch is very much just paranoia. And just fear of...
It's about a lot of things, but yeah.
Yeah, but like there's so much paranoia in there, and like you start to put yourself in that situation. Okay, well, what if I am alone and everybody ostracizes me and everybody thinks that I am a witch or that I'm causing all these problems?
You're part of a society where you literally do not matter.
Right.
You have no rights, you have no say.
That's terrifying to me.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not to other people in other countries, but like as Americans, that's kind of terrifying.
I think that's the interesting thing with that film, is that it's these very basic fears that anyone can have, but they've couched them in this horror story about, like, there is a witch in the woods.
Right. And then my answer to, like, when people always are like, well, she joined the witch coven. I'm like, well, did she? Was it real? And then they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I don't know. What do I mean? And then it's just like an expanding.
Well, and even then, if you go like the literal route with the ending, what you're talking about, if everyone around you is saying that you're evil and there's something wrong with you, and plenty of people are in that situation, and then they just lean into it.
Yeah, fuck it.
If this is what I am, so be it.
Well, that was also her best alternative, That's only for her to really be free. So,
and I think as a studio, A24 leans heavily into those artistic ideas, and so like I think a lot of people would shoot down these movies as elevated horror. I think elevated horror is a nicer term for art house horror film.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because if you say the term And even the term art house tends to be derogatory when you're referring to even dramas or anything else. Because
Well, that depends on who you're talking to.
Well,
You say art house, I get excited.
yeah, but like if you're talking to a lot of people who, let me reiterate this: there's absolutely nothing wrong with just enjoying cinema for a good time.
Right.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing fucking wrong with that.
Plenty of people have enough going on in their life. They don't want to have to be confronted with.
Scorsese can fuck off by saying people getting pissed about
Hey
the
now, hey.
But for real though, like if somebody just wants to enjoy a Marvel movie because it's big explosion and it makes them feel good and it takes their mind off the shit that is life right now.
Sure, but I mean, I don't think he was criticizing people for enjoying that.
No.
I think his point was that it's not art.
I mean,
And to an extent, he's right.
it's
a product.
from a certain point of view.
What is art?
Right. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it.
But then when we talk about like art house films, you know what you're getting into. It
Right.
might be avant-garde. It might be something that's not so linear.
It might be subtitled in black and white.
Right.
Often, complex, layered plot. There might be multiple interpretations of what
You
you're
might
watching.
leave going, I don't know what I watched.
You might have to fucking pay attention.
So I think in order to get around that art house or artsy fartsy film, and let's face it, as horror fans, we always want to be better than everybody else.
That's any nerd culture, that's sort of a central thing.
We want to take because horror is shit on by mainstream media. So what we want to do as horror fans is elevate ourselves and put ourselves on a platform and look down and be like, oh no, you just don't understand the merits. And while that's a bad thing in some ways, it's not always a bad thing. It's being proud of what you love, but you also got to be welcoming to anybody who wants to jump up on that pedestal with you.
Mm-hmm. That's often where the problem comes into frame.
Yeah.
I do want to drill in on what you said, though. So this term elevated horror, online and in discussions and stuff, it gets equally used derisively as much as it gets used in praise to talk about these films. So in a way, if you're looking at it from like a mainstream perspective, it's sort of saying that like these films are a shift away from the cheap frights and trashier elements to stuff that is more thoughtful and cerebral, which to some people that is like, yes, see, we are acceptable now. Other people who don't see anything wrong with those other, quote unquote trashy films is like, well, why are you making these airs about yourself and putting on like this is so much better than what's over here? It's all horror films,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing is we can all exist together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's room for both.
Absolutely. So
here's the closest I got to sort of an actual quote unquote definition for this. If you look like Wikipedia, there's not an elevated horror article.
Really?
Yeah. So there's no like defined thing for this, and I kind of cobbled this together through some different articles, my own thoughts, whatnot.
Merriam-Webster defines.
So typically, elevated horror films will have a more analytical layer to the story being told and its themes or message compared to earlier horror films. There'll often be a lack of jump scares or overt gore to instead focus on being emotionally or psychologically disturbing. If you contrast any A24 film with, say, a by-a-number slasher, you're going to see the divide there in those kind of elements. And that's not to say that either one is wrong. Merely each one has a different goal and a focus on how they're going to scare you and convey what they're trying to do. Often, there'll be a heavy layer of social context to whatever is going on, and time will be spent to get you attached to and caring about the characters, because the eventual horror relies on sort of their emotional despair or the trauma that they go through.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's pretty... Yeah.
I don't know if that's good.
I agree with that.
Ballpark.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I don't know what else we can really say now about elevated horror. I think that we've defined it. I think we've talked about...
Well...
I've got a little more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's sort of the other end of this where people will use it derisively. Detractors will often say that this describes films that only non-horror fans would like. They say that it's a reductive way to look at things, and it forces this high art, low art dichotomy that just makes a greater divide sort of in the genre.
Which goes back to the whole Silence of the Lambs thing. They wanted to call it a thriller because they didn't want to be seen as liking a horror film.
And so they say that by kind of using that term to praise these films, whether you mean to or not, in a way, you're kind of saying that then other stuff that doesn't meet this mark is somehow cheap or disposable or less important than the films being made.
Yeah, and that's where I think it comes in to the join me on that pedestal thing.
Mm-hmm.
And with every fandom, there always seems to be a line, or like if you see somebody wearing a shirt of a band that you like, you don't walk up to them and be like, yeah, can you name their best 5 albums or name every track off of this album?
Some people do that, though.
They do.
Unless it's a Kardashian wearing it. Then, yeah.
Right. Well, but those people do, and therein lies part of the problem.
That's the whole snobbery thing. Like, I got to know more than you and all that crap, right? You're a poser.
So here's the other end of this, and it's probably maybe the last question before we just talk about some films real quick. Is elevated horror its own subgenre?
I'm going to say no.
I don't think so. I think it may be a created subgenre that's not necessarily... I think it's an accidental subgenre.
I think it's a good marketing term to put
fair.
on something.
Yeah, that's fair.
What I wrote down in my notes here is that I think it's interesting because when you look at any of these films that are quote-unquote elevated horror, you can typically take them and place them in a sort of horror subgenre already.
Sure.
And this elevated thing is just kind of a tag on top that other people are ascribing to it.
Yeah, all it means is that this movie is made really well. That's my takeaway. It's a well-made movie. It's a thoughtful, well-made film that someone put effort into, and it wasn't just a cash grab. You know, which is... That's a good thing. You know, they're good films. Now, that doesn't mean that a crappy slasher can't be a good movie either, because its intention is to do certain things, and if it does it well, you know, if it kills a lot of people, a lot of good kills, you know, some nudity, whatever they're after, and they do that, then it's succeeded.
Yes.
I think a lot of people would disagree with you, though, when it comes to are they good films? Because
But that's all
Again,
subjective.
everything's subjective.
It's all about intent.
Yeah, everything's subjective, and a lot of people would say, no, I don't think those are good films, because in their mind, what makes a good film is what satisfies what they wanted to see going in.
Right.
Yeah. So, for me, oftentimes what makes a good film is something that does what I didn't expect it to do. You know, and probably my answer for a question you might ask is going to do that. Answer that. So.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit, and I'm right with you guys. I don't really like the term. I do think it's sort of just a marketing thing. I think it's the next stage in this thing of like, well, it's not a horror, it's a thriller. It's not a horror, it's a social comedy. It's not horror, it's this. Yeah. It's just the next thing that a lot of critics lean on to make these like high art instead of just slumming it with the rest of us.
Yeah.
To that point, though, there's always been films like this. And we've been talking about this a lot off air, so I thought it was worth it to kind of close out talking about that a little bit here. What would you guys say are some of your favorite films that you would consider, if they were made today and released, there'd be someone out there calling it, quote, elevated horror?
Okay. You want to go first, Michael, or should I?
No, you should.
Okay. Well, I mean, Reflecting Skin's an obvious choice.
Right.
We've talked about.
And that was the point of me branding it that way.
Right. But I probably would go with The Wicker Man, the original
I love The Wicker
1973
Man.
Wicker Man.
Yeah, for sure.
If that came out today, because I think A24 films, a lot of those draw on that same feeling.
And a lot of the ones that have been elevated horror, they kind of lean into folk horror.
Sure, like Midsommar.
Yeah.
I mean, that owes Wicker Man a huge debt. And it's, the death count's very low in that movie. A lot of people would call it boring. But
a lot of people are wrong.
But man, it's a scary film, and it sticks with you.
You're talking about the Nicolas Cage one, right?
Obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously.
The Beast!
And I do believe it was Christopher Lee's favorite role he ever played, right?
Right. Yeah, and his performance is great. It's just such a great film. And
that's a good one.
You know, I could see why, especially younger people, here I am being grumpy old man Jason.
There's kids on your lawn.
Because film language changes over time.
Right.
You know, like even us, if we go back and watch an old silent film, there's this huge disconnect because that style is completely different from what we're used to. Things change. So I think people who've grown up watching YouTube videos and quick editing, quick cuts, maybe not the longest attention span. You know, maybe they don't want to devote that much time to a movie like The Wicker Man or Reflecting Skin or the A24 films. And they see this quote-unquote slow pacing, and it's boring. It's boring to them. I mean, a lot of it's about film language and understanding film language. And I'm not trying to be a snob and say they don't understand film language. But, I mean, you do have to meet it halfway, you know?
Sometimes investing in something and spending time in it is worth it.
Right.
You know, it's not always what you get from the surface. It's what...
You're missing so much if you dismiss old movies just
Right.
because they were made differently.
Oh, mine...
Well, what is yours?
Yes, give us.
I'm going to say Todd Browning's Freaks.
Nice. Deep cut.
Because if you watch Freaks, and I've watched it not too long ago, holy shit, that's fucked up.
That's a great movie. That's
But-
a brutal movie.
But, like, everything about that is psychological.
And there's definitely a layer of social commentary in it, too.
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And, like, part of my love for that movie is that I did my college thesis on P.T. Barnum. So, like, I examined the lives of freak show artists and freak show actors and the way they were treated and the way they were exploited, but yet they also gained so much from this, you know, from, like, they made more money than anyone else that was like them.
Right.
So when you look at Freaks, everything about it is this, like, throwing yourself into another world. And then you're looking around and no one is like you. And then you start to, like, question... I don't know, it's kind of hard to break down Freaks, like, quickly. But, like, you start to question yourself. Like, well, what makes everyone different? What makes me different? Why am I who I am? And why are you different than me? And it becomes very much a social nightmare. And then, I don't want to spoil Freaks. I mean, it's like a 70-year-old movie, but like, but to me, the payoff is worth it. Like, once you invest in it, once you see the final payoffs, you're like, oh fuck,
Yeah.
you know. So that would be mine of what I think.
Cool. And that could possibly actually be the first real midnight movie, too. Because it was pulled from screens. A lot of countries, I think to this day, it still has problems being shown in some places.
Wow.
But, yeah, I mean, it was just, they tried to get rid of that movie, scrub it out, and then it was rediscovered decades later.
Which I find an interesting commentary in itself, because it's actually, it is not, a lot of people think it's exploiting people with disabilities, but if you watch the film, it is not at all exploiting people with disabilities.
Yeah, they tend to, when they're talking about that, they tend to talk about the last scene where they're like wiggling through the mud and stuff after the real villains of the movie.
Yeah.
But I think that's also more like people, you will become what people tell you are after so long.
Exactly, like with the witch.
With the witch, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, not always, of course, but I mean, there's a danger of that. You hear this over and over again, and yeah, you're going to start acting like that because you think that's all you are.
Like, I never once viewed any of the quote-unquote freaks of that movie as the villains.
No,
Like,
right.
it was never...
Even at the end, honestly.
Those are never the villains to me in that
Yeah.
film.
I think when you see them like that in that final scene, if it even comes off ever at all like they are the villains, it's just because you're getting the perspective of the guy they're after.
Right, you've just put yourself in those shoes instead. So what's yours, Dustin?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, God, there's so many you could pick. I think I'm going to just highlight it because I love it so much. Don't Look Now, directed by Nicholas Roeg.
I have got to rewatch this movie because I saw it. Well, go ahead.
It's just, it's a very simple plot where it's really just, a husband and wife, they lose their kid in a tragic accident. And it's just them going through their grief and struggling with everything and trying to find a way to move on in their life. And it's this little simple, like, haunting ghost tale
Yeah.
that I don't want to spoil the ending because I do think, weirdly, a lot of people haven't seen it for some reason and
I
they
haven't.
need to.
I haven't.
It is worth watching. And I need to revisit it. I was a little underwhelmed when I saw it, but this was a while back.
The emotions, like, run so high in it, and it's so overwhelming and so sad in the end when everything plays out all the way.
And that ending is a classic.
It's just, it sticks with you forever and just leaves you, like, shook. I got, like, cold chills the first time I watched it.
Yeah. No, I'll grant you that for sure. Interesting choice. Yeah.
So, cool picks. I think, real quick, we ought to say most George Romero films could probably be considered elevated horror to a degree, especially all his Dead films. Like, the level of social commentary and the exploration of, like, certain characters and their motivations just...
Like the amusement park. I mean, that's
Shut
a
the fuck
prime.
up, Jason. Shut the fuck up and get out of here.
That is a prime piece of elevated horror right there.
Damn it, you asshole.
cut that part out.
We don't need to... Michael's triggered.
All right, well, real quick to wrap up, I think we've covered it as best we can. Truthfully, another part of this answer is I didn't do a big breakdown like we usually do on stuff about elevated horror because there's not a whole lot to talk about.
Well, what are some other elevated horrors, real quick? If people want to get a better idea of what we're talking about, like what are some of the others?
Give us their favorite.
Let's say a favorite A24 since we've been focused on them so much.
Can do. I'm going to go first. I'm going to pick it first.
Okay.
So I can claim it for anyone else. Hereditary.
God damn it. That was mine.
Were we just all fighting to pick that one?
It's so good.
That's one of the first films that haunted me. Mm-hmm. That I knew nothing about it going in, knew none of the twists, none of the turns, and it sat there and it fucking haunted me for a week. And I still, if I dwell on the emotion of that film, that will drag me down in a second.
That's the only reason that one tops The Witch for me, is because it's legit scary.
It's brutal.
Parts of that stuck with me for days after.
But if you're not invested in that movie, I don't think it will be as scary. You need to throw yourself into it.
And you can see it in discussions online and stuff where people just go, it wasn't scary, it was boring. I don't know what the fuck people are thinking.
God, it's...
A clucking sound should not be scary.
But it is.
It was so fucking scary in this movie. That's all I need to say.
It made me think of The Grudge in the same way that like Death Rattle became so iconic and just the sound that sticks with you forever.
Yeah.
What's yours, Dustin? Because now Jason fucked me.
Who's going to steal your next pick?
Maybe. It's so hard because they're all so good. Even the ones I haven't cared for as much, I still love them to death. But I think I would go with Midsummer. So sticking with Ari Aster. It's not as good as Hereditary.
I told you you'd take your next pick.
It's not as good as Hereditary, I don't think. But the story of this, very flawed, very dysfunctional relationship and the way it kind of breaks down over the course of the film, I think that is like deeply relatable in a way that a lot of people didn't want to see, and so they just was like, oh, it's a dumb Wicker Man knockoff.
It's very honest. It's a very honest, brutal kind of movie.
The whole like folk horror scenario in it, really to me, like that is just a vehicle to tell this story about the two characters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an elevated horror because it's really about relationships.
Right.
Well, then I guess I'll go with The Witch because The Witch is on my top 5 anyway. And every time I rewatch The Witch, I get something new out of it, which I also love. Sometimes I think with these films, the more you watch them, whatever mood you're in at the time, maybe you pick up on something else.
Yeah, it probably colors it a little differently.
Yeah. Because I was thinking of The Witch, but if I were to mention something that we hadn't already mentioned, what is it?
I'm crossing my fingers because I'm hoping you're saying what I think you're going to say. We'll see.
I already lost it.
Oh, no.
Well, we're going to go back and edit this.
What did you think I was going to say?
Oh, The Lighthouse.
That actually... and part of me wanted to avoid The Lighthouse because you both did an Ari Aster film, and then I just did 2 Robert Eggers films. But there's nothing wrong with that. And The Lighthouse was one of those films that the more I think about it, the more I like it.
Oh, yeah.
On my initial watching, I'm like, I don't know what I just saw.
Yeah.
Everything, I mean, like, acting-wise is top-notch. Directing, it's shot beautifully. Like, everything about the movie is beautiful to watch. But I was like, what the fuck did I just watch? But the more
I was going to say, it's fucking criminal Defoe did not get an Oscar nomination. It is criminal.
Yeah, speaking of the whole, like, Academy not liking horror thing.
Oh, my God. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So I will throw in The Lighthouse in there. So those are maybe, like, I don't want to cheat and do an extra, but we were trying to say ones that maybe you should watch, and we already talked about The Witch. But, like, if you were to watch those 4, those are also some of the most divisive movies when you look at online commentaries about them. People it's always sitting at 3 stars. It's either people absolutely love it, they're 5 stars all the way, or they're like 1, no actual vampires in this movie. So... I think those are fair. Those are fair starts. And then what would be super cool is if you're new to elevated horror as a listener, or if you're new to this kind of horror, and you watch something, and maybe it strikes a chord in you for something that you have seen, and you're thinking, oh, maybe this could fit into that category, fucking write us.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Like, let's get a conversation going that's, one, civil, where we can talk about all layers of cinema or whatnot, but like, what are some other movies that would fall into this quote subgenre that maybe are overlooked or considered quote thrillers that you could argue, no, that's totally a horror film.
Yeah.
So as always, You can hit us on OnlyFans. Well, not anymore because they're shutting us down.
They ruined our ASMR
You can still get
dreams.
naked on there. It's okay.
I actually read the rules of what you can't do, and it's pretty funny. I won't do it on here. So you can hit us up on Facebook, on Instagram, on the Twitters.
Email us at
Email us.
genreexposure@gmail.com.
So hit us up on all of those. Write us in. What's your favorite, quote, elevated horror film? Mm-hmm. Or what's something that you think should fall into that category that's maybe not listed as that?
You know, maybe we need a PO address, because anyone who's really into elevated horror would probably actually write a letter.
And seal it with a wax stamp.
Well, yeah.
Send us a missive.
If a pigeon shows up at my door. Oh, it's an elevated horror. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, this is just one of our quick cut episodes where we wanted to finally shut the fuck up about elevated horror.
We're
and
done.
Nail it down.
Nails in there.
I ain't talking
Boom.
about this shit anymore.
Done. Let's get
Until we pick
trashy.
the next one.
So as always, you've been listening to Genre Exposure. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.